It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to welcome back to my show today a guest who's been on before. His name's Kevin Craine. He's the host of the Everyday MBA podcast and head of the Craine Group. Kevin, welcome to Accelerate.
Hello, Andy. It's great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, so take a minute maybe for people that didn't hear the previous episode. Introduce yourself a little bit.
Well, thank you, Andy. I'm the host of Everyday MBA. It's a weekly business podcast where we talk to business authors and thought leaders about success techniques and tips that you don't necessarily learn in business school. And I'm also the principal behind Craine Communications Group. We're a writing and production firm. We do podcast production and content creation for a lot of companies in the high-tech space and others. And that's what led me to you, Andy. You've been a guest on my show, Everyday MBA, as well.
Yeah. I noticed you had just replayed that episode not that long. Actually, you replayed my interview of you, on Everyday MBA.
That's right. We had a great conversation a while back. And yeah, as a special episode, we presented some excerpts from that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, how'd that go?
Oh, it's great. And I appreciate the opportunity to kind of get out and tell my story about what I think is great. What the characteristics are of great killer knowledge leadership content, which is kind of what we talked about last time.
Yeah, be on the other side of the mic. So
that's right, yeah.
So you are a podcast host, and you produce podcasts for others. So let's talk about podcast and sales and marketing, because this is a topic that I'm sort of hammering a little bit recently on the show, because I think it's such a great content vehicle potentially for everyone that creates content.
I agree. Podcasting is a really an often overlooked place to be.
Well, and so from my perspective is, one of the things that I work with a lot of mid-sized and smaller companies, CEOs, entrepreneurs of those companies, startups, and yeah, they know they should be blogging. They know they should be creating original content, but staring at a blank screen is so hard that in many cases, maybe sometimes they don't want to go out and hire a writer because it doesn't sound very authentic for them, they think, or it doesn't happen consistently. And so great thing about podcasting is that, gosh, you could start just by writing a few points that you want to make on a piece of paper and recording yourself. You don't even have to do an interview, or you bring in, potential clients as interview subjects, and then you take a transcript of that recording, that becomes a blog post, and then you can break those down into tweets that go out. I mean, the multi-purpose, or the ability to repurpose it in multiple ways is sort of unmatched.
Well, I agree. And as a producer, I kind of feel like part of my job, part of my mission is to help make that easy for folks. I mean, as you mentioned, it can be daunting, to have that blank page staring at you when you need to do a blog post or whatever. And that's why I've made a living for years as a writer. So podcasting is really an extension of that service for my clients. So my job, I feel, is to kind of make that easy, make the technology easy, make the effort easy. And many of my clients, it's as simple as getting on Skype with me, once a week or twice a month or however often, and going through the process of just getting something down in a recording. And then I take that back to the workshop and sprinkle the magic pixie dust and do some audio editing and voiceover. And we've created a podcast with rather simple tools and without a lot of pain and suffering.
So to me, again, a couple things about strengths of podcast. One is from a branding element, is rightly or wrongly, I think it conveys a little additional sense of expertise. This is a broadcast. I mean, people's perception of a broadcast type medium are different than perhaps writing a blog.
Oh, I agree. And it can work for both individuals that are looking to boost their personal brand, and can also work for organizations that are looking to boost their organizational brand. I have both kinds of clients. One is a rather large tech company that we're producing a show. It hasn't launched yet. We have several in the can. It's about ready to launch. And for them, it was all about stepping out in their industry as a knowledge leader, as an organization, and giving voice to some of their subject matter experts. And but it works also really great for individuals like you and me that are looking to boost their profile as knowledge leaders. What a great way to present value to your audience and present yourself in a way that gives you a great deal of credibility and interest.
Well, I think if you listen to this as an entrepreneur, CEO, C-level person, there's a level of engagement, I call it intimacy, with the content, especially this long-form content of a podcast versus a blog. The blog can't match. So if you have somebody that's on your list, let's say they're on your mail list or they're a subscriber to the show and they're familiar with your product, but not really, they haven't taken a step to engage with you, listening to somebody actually talk about the product and the passion and expertise they convey, that the nuances that come out through the spoken word versus reading it on a page, can make all the difference. I mean, you're a podcast host. I'm a podcast host. I have people on my show 6 days a week, and I get emails from them all the time saying, yeah, I got a contract as a result of somebody hearing me on your show.
Well, sure. And you're right in someone's head. I mean, literally in their head while they're working out, on the treadmill, or maybe in the airport waiting for a plane, while they're commuting back and forth to work, on the train. So you're literally inside someone's head. I listen often to podcasts at night as well. And, so there's a definite intimacy there that you just don't get in other forms of content. And I got to tell you, I've been a writer forever, and I do a lot of content creation as a writer. But my distress somewhat is that people are not reading like they used to. They're simply not reading as much content as long-form content, white papers, or even books. We've really become more and more of a soundbite sort of organization, or not organization, a society. And so podcasting really fits in well with that. I think you can create content that is somewhat more easily consumed. It's a bit more passive than reading or something like that. And I think that's one of the really great strengths of podcasting that we're forgetting as marketers and content creators, that literal ease of consuming it and the intimacy and the power of the type of media that it really is.
Yeah, and get back to the sort of idea of the intimacy. Someone says that this is a cliche. I still believe this is true, is that people buy from those they know, like, and trust. Now, like doesn't necessarily mean a deep personal friendship, but know, like, and trust is, people sort of, because of, and this is not a phenomenon just relegated purely to podcasts, is, people these days, given sort of the pervasiveness of media, feel like they know people better than perhaps they actually do through listening to podcasts or watching videos. And so when it comes to establishing that initial connection and forming some initial impressions or perceptions in the minds of the people you want to do business with, again, I would argue the podcast is substantially more effective at that than any written piece that you could do.
Well, and the combination, I think, is super powerful. I was just having this conversation with a client the other day who's thinking of coming on board. And so the question was, well, how does it work with our blog, right? And I think it works great. A couple ways. Number one, a blog is good, a podcast is good, but together, the synergy of the two is even more powerful than each individually sitting alone. So to me, I want to look at ways we can hook those two together. In my blog content, I want to put hyperlinks that take people over to audio content. Maybe that's the whole entire episode, or maybe that's just excerpts from that episode or different episodes that just give people a taste of that audio while they're reading my blog. So that's great. And now
so you might edit snippets out of a podcast into separate files that you'd make available.
Correct. Once you have audio created, it doesn't have to be a full 30-minute episode. It could be parts of, an editor can take that and cut it up and make it into lots of different things. That's a really cool, different audio things. So why not populate your blog with those types of links and that kind of flavorful audio content? Heck, people are probably there reading your blog on their smartphone anyway, maybe while they're waiting for their plane in the airport, maybe while they have headphones on. Well, sure, why not? Boom. You're going to click over and maybe hear that or go right to the episode. And then flip side of that is in your episodes of your audio content, wouldn't you mention your blog and say, go to blog post XYZ for more on this, or hyperlinks over to your blog, or I have clients that ask me to narrate, or they do their own narration of their blog content and make it into audio content. So you're literally taking the content that you've put your effort into in terms of creating your blog, your blood, sweat, and tears and time, and you're saying, okay, great, it's out there now in written form, but guess what? It's only going to take me this little extra effort to make it into an audio format, either having someone narrate it for me or narrate it myself, and now it's a podcast episode or an audio blog, if you will. So now I'm reaching people in two different ways with the same content.
Which is really one of the keys, right? Is you want to be thinking about every piece of content that you create isn't a way to repurpose it.
Absolutely. And why wouldn't you take older content that maybe you've created and I'm a writer in a written form, and repurpose that into audio content, especially if it's evergreen content. Maybe you wrote a book a couple of years ago and it's been out there, it's been doing okay, but it's maturing now, and it's a good book, but it's sitting out there. Why not take that book now and repurpose some of the parts and pieces of that content into audio format, and then release that now as audio stuff, maybe an ebook or an audiobook or a series, any number of things that are now revitalizing that content, giving new life to it. It's still good stuff, right? It's still your concepts. It still means something. So it's just a way to now bring more power to your written content that you've already created as well. And to me, those types of things are just simply, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've given me an idea I'll talk to you about later. So
I'm giving away my secrets here. You know that, Andy. This is the stuff that I would typically maybe keep a little close to the vest and just share with my clients and stuff. But I really do believe that, it's podcasting is a vehicle for all of this, and opens doors for creative content creation and repurposing that we never had before, just by starting to think, wow, I can be a podcaster, or I can create audio content as well.
All right, so let's think about another use of a podcast. And I've brought this up when I work with some companies on this as well, as my business, is a podcast as a sales tool. So, for instance, let's say that you're thinking about some content you can create that connect with your potential buyers. Is use a podcast to say, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of decision makers, stakeholders, influencers at accounts that we want to penetrate, especially in an enterprise sale. And I'm going to invite those individuals to be a guest on my weekly podcast. And we're going to have a short 20-minute podcast. We're going to interview them. And then all these benefits start flowing from that. So, one, the person that comes on the show, when you put the episode out there, they publicize it within the organization. There's a sort of implied top-down referral, if you will, for you. You start building this library of content over time, where other people that might be prospects hear that you're talking to all the leading lights in your industry. There's implied expertise there. There's all sorts of benefits that come from something as simple as a podcast that you use as a vehicle to connect with people that you want to do business with in sort of a neutral setting. And I look at sort of playing off something that you had said earlier what would you, as a vendor, what would you pay to be able to connect with and have a sales call with, let's say, a C-level person at one of your target accounts? And then look at what the cost it takes to produce that podcast, which is pretty small. As we both know, it doesn't cost much at all to produce these things. Wow, the trade-off monetarily is an obvious trade-off. Of course I'd pay, even if it cost a couple $1,000 to produce an episode of a podcast, which it doesn't, I would still pay that to have a one-on-one conversation with the CEO of a company I want to do business with.
Well, absolutely. I think you're onto something there as a strategy to connect with folks. I mean, you're right. What a better way to connect intimately, in a sense, with a prospect or someone that you'd like to have a deeper conversation with than using the podcast to be a vehicle to do that. And then in that discussion, if you're a good interviewer, you have this great discovery call. Exactly. What are the things that challenge you? What are the things that have been successful for you? What's your advice for other folks in the industry? These kinds of things are great educational pieces that you take away for yourself as well. Yeah. The other aspect that I often will bring up with my clients is customer conversations. So what a great way to engage with your customers. If you have a happy customer that has been using your product or service, number one, why wouldn't we want to interview them and have them tell your story for you about how great you are and how happy they are with their experience with you, and then portray that to the world. So now that's great. That's a great credible story. Rather than saying Andy Paul is excellent, we're going to have Andy Paul's customer say he's excellent. And oh, by the way, that customer is in my vertical. So, wow, maybe I should call Andy Paul because this other person thinks he's awesome. That kind of thing. And so interviewing customers then also gives you that entree to that further conversation that you want to have with existing clients and customers as well.
Yeah.
So now you're bolstering that relationship, moving that forward, flattering them with an interview, and good things come out of that as well. So podcasting, as you say, is this great forum. Whether you overtly do that as a strategy or not, or how far down that continuum you go is really up to you. But it is absolutely something to be considered in your outreach and marketing strategy. Sure.
And I think there's this perception, which is really a myth, that this is something that podcasts are something only millennials listen to. And I think the analogy would be to say, well, that's like saying that only millennials are only people using Facebook. Or the millennials have largely abandoned Facebook because their parents are on it. The stats that I understand, and I've seen as a podcast conference not that long ago, where, the listenership is, first of all, 2 points about the listenership of podcasts. One, there are a lot of podcasts out there, but there are so many listeners that aren't, a potential audience that aren't listening to them, that, the opportunity is still huge. And it's not just millennials.
No, I don't believe so. I forget the latest stats. They've probably gone up, but a third of Americans listen to podcasts. I mean, that's a third of the country. So I guess my argument would be, we could split hairs about this and that and the other, but do you really want to ignore a vehicle that can get you potentially in the heads of a third of Americans?
Yeah. At your peril, right?
Not really. At your peril. And if you don't, then your competition will.
Yeah, I think it's safe to assume that we're going to see more and more podcasts. If you remember back in the day, and this phrase sort of predates, I'm sure, a number of our audience, but there was this phrase when right in the early days, I guess, of the internet, they call it point casting, right? So instead of broadcasting, you were point casting, creating content for very narrow niches, which has really come to pass. But podcasting gives you the ability to really target very tightly to the people that you want to connect with, which means that it's always going to be a good vehicle for you.
Well, and think about it. If you're there in some moment in time and you're going to be consuming content, I mean, are you going to stop and read a white paper? Are you going to stop and read a blog? Or are you going to click on something and listen to 30 minutes of audio or 10 minutes of audio or even just a couple of minutes of audio? I just think the ease of it is undeniable. And I think that's part of what's driving the growth is the ease of consumption on the part of our audience. And I think that's a real powerful factor to consider whether or not you have 1 million downloads or just a few. I mean, all it takes is, in a sense, just that one. Right. For me, I don't know about everybody else that's listening, but for me, one listener today that goes to crainegroup.com and says, hey, Kevin, I'm interested in your services as a writer or a podcast producer. That makes all the effort, what little effort I've done to sit here and talk with you, but all the effort in putting together this podcast or any other really sort of worth it, because that engagement could be worth, I don't know, you tell me what the dollar amount of that engagement could be worth.
A lot. And I know you spent hours preparing to come on the show. So
I did. I've got my notes here and books and the dictionaries nearby.
Everything. That's right. We're gonna, it's a little bit of a stress test for you. Yeah. So, okay. So podcasting, let's move on a little bit, not completely, but I want to talk about your podcast, Everyday MBA. And not to confuse people, because it's not a new episode every day, but it's
every week.
It's the Everyday MBA. It's what you can apply every day in your life and in your business. So you talk with a lot of top business leaders. I mean, and like me, I feel doing this podcast, this show, we do 6 new episodes a week. From a selfish perspective, I learn so much. right? I mean, I've been around the block a lot, but I love it because I continue to learn so many new things, and that I can apply in my own business and can share these with others. So what's sort of the number one issue that you're seeing from your guests out there in business today? What people most concerned about? What are they struggling with the most?
Well, there are a number of topics. One, just yesterday, the episode I recorded with a couple of folks where we were talking about customer experience. Okay, so we're all talking about customer experience these days, and I think there's a lot of recognition that customer experience is a big driver in terms of ongoing success and so forth. So that's nothing new. But the one thing that I think that I'm hearing more now is the disconnect between the strategic need to manage customer experience and the vehicles that actually create that customer experience. And one of them being the very frontline types of people that drive your customer experience. Suppose
like sales.
Like sales, the frontline people that deal with folks on the phone, they deal with folks in the office, even online, the mechanisms that are used to engage with your company, however that is. So those are the things that need the attention now that we have a strategic focus on customer experience. And when it comes to frontline people, for example, those are often the people that are paid the least and are often the ones that are the farthest away from the strategic vision of the organization. So if they're not bought into what it is that you're trying to do, or they're just getting through their jobs and don't really care, that's not going to deliver the type of customer experience that we want to portray. So I think that's one of the topics that has been coming up recently for me in my interviews, is really looking at the frontline people and the frontline processes of an organization and how well they really do or do not promote customer experience.
So from what you're hearing and talking to your guest, is this really to me, it seems like it starts with a culture issue. Yeah, you can have a strategic vision, but how's your culture wound into that?
That's right.
I think of a story from Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, where he talks about when Kevin O'Neill took over Alcoa after leaving, working for one of the administrations in the White House, whereas the cabinet secretary, that his first press conference, he didn't talk about earnings or sales or anything. He talked about creating a culture of safety at the company, and he kept focused on message, and that resonated so with the employees that, over time, safety had a huge impact on top line and bottom line results.
Well, people need to feel safe. They need to feel like they're empowered, and they need to feel part of the organization in a way that really matters. I mean, in my view, when it comes to customer experience, you really do need to care about what the experience of your customers is, and then understand that. So my question would be to leaders that are concerned about customer experience: what is it really like for your customers when they interact with your company? Do you really know? Or is it a situation where you're assuming you know, or it's not what we think it is or what we say it is or even how it should be. It's what it really is. And I think that starts with simple things like going to our company website. Is it understandable? Is it easy to navigate? Does it tell our clients what it is that we do? I got to tell you, a lot of times I'll go to a website doing my research for clients or whatever, and I'll go to a website, and I'm a pretty smart guy. Sometimes I can't figure out what it is that they do, So that's those kinds of things. Or buying from our company. What kinds of hoops and jumps do I need to go through to buy from you? My wife and I were signing up for some insurance. And oh my gosh, it took, I don't know, hours to work through the buying process. And, it should have been a much easier process. So what's the friction that people experience when they're trying to buy from you? If it's hard to buy, they're going to go somewhere else. Those kinds of things that really demonstrate customer experience. And then finally, what's it like when you really do walk into the office and interact with your frontline people? And I guess that show, Undercover Boss, does a lot of that. I mean, that's really brought that to the front. But seriously.
Well, but then I think that show is the perfect illustration. And I talk about this in my first book, as senior level managers, they have to walk the walk and talk the talk. The thing is, oftentimes you get these strategic visions that are put out there that they don't tie the culture into, because at the top level, they don't exemplify it themselves.
Well, I got to tell you, I think that stuff is simple. You don't necessarily have to have the CEO, put a mustache on and go. I mean, restaurants do this where they have, secret shoppers or secret diners, right? And so just get your cousin and his wife to go, do the process or sign up online or whatever. And then, or someone that you trust, or do it yourself or whatever. And then really take a look at that process and understand what that customer experience really is. And it'll do two things, I think. It'll either verify that it's great and you're doing all the right things, maybe you tweak a little bit here, or it'll unearth some deficiencies that you hadn't thought of before, and you can take action on.
So what's another issue that maybe behind customer experience, which I agree is a huge one, and especially in the sales, we've talked about this because I'm a absolute believer that the first line differentiation in business these days when you're trying to sell something is the salesperson. It is that experience with the salesperson that becomes so important. So what's next on the list that you're hearing that business leaders are concerned about?
Well, be your customer's hero. I think I had another interesting interview with Gordon Treadgold a couple of weeks ago. He's written a book called Go Fast, and he talks about the need to be agile. And how often our processes don't let us be agile enough. And I think he makes a really great point that, I don't know, how many times have you worked with a client and it seems like it takes weeks or months to make a decision, right? Or it takes weeks or months to have a project come to completion. I'm a content creator, and so sometimes it's surprising to me where we'll work on a project and I'll create some content. It could be some writing, and then that part will be done, but then it will take weeks or months before that content is issued or put out there, and it's just a matter of the agility of the organization is not very responsive, and I think maybe that's maybe a little bit low impact, but when it comes to a lot of parts of business, being agile can be your big differentiator. And so I think agileness is another big issue that I think, and it kind of gets back to process that folks are really being concerned about today. We live in a very fast-paced world. And so if you're slow and kludgy, again, I think you're at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, well, and there's a reason my first book was called Zero Time Selling. I mean,
well, there you go. Yeah.
And it still boggles the mind that there are so many organizations that don't really understand the value of speed. And so I work with, and people in the audience who listen to this know is the salespeople can control their speed. So like a lot of people in other parts of the organization, maybe they have less control over it, but you're out talking to a customer, your responsiveness is completely under your control as an individual. You're not dependent on the corporate organization to be responsive. And I set an example in my most recent book. CEO of IBM sending out a video message to the entire workforce saying that all questions will be answered within 24 hours that they get from customers and inquiries and questions from customers. I mean, that's putting a stake in the ground saying, hey, this is important and each of you can do it. It doesn't require a process to be responsive. And so I think certainly in the sales perspective is you have to take ownership of that need for responsiveness, for just flat out speed. If you have a chance to do something that requires a response to a customer, do it now. That's my standard default. Do it now.
Don't wait. Right.
They're very interesting. All right. Well, Kevin, it's been great to have you on the show again.
Well, thank you,
second
Andy.
time. And we'll be sure to have you back again. So tell people how they can learn more about you.
Well, you can find me at crainegroup.com. That's CRAINE, crainegroup.com. That'll get you to this place where you can find out about my writing and podcast production services. And certainly tune in to Everyday MBA at everyday-mba.com.
Yeah, and be sure to listen to the episode with your special
with
guest,
Andy Paul.
Andy Paul, yes. So, as if you haven't heard enough of me here, go somewhere else and listen to it. So, well, Kevin, thanks again. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to make this podcast Accelerate a part of your daily routine, listening on your commute, in the gym, or make it part of your morning sales meeting. That way, you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Kevin Craine, who shared his expertise on how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.